Imagine waking up before the sun rises. Not in a bed, not in a house, but on the open African savannah. The tall grass moves. Somewhere in the darkness, something is watching you. You have no walls, no weapons, no fire. Nothing between you and the vast predator-filled wilderness except the warmth of a few sleeping bodies beside you. You are not the apex predator here. You are the prey. This is not a story about lions. This is a story about the moment your ancestors refused to become their next meal, and what that refusal cost them. What we are about to explore changed the trajectory of an entire species, and ultimately gave rise to the civilization you are living in right now. But before we go further, if you want to understand where you truly come from, you need to understand what was hunting you. The world we are about to enter looks nothing like ours. 3 million years ago, the African continent was a crucible of evolution. Vast forests gave way to sweeping grasslands as the climate shifted, a transformation that would force every creature on the continent to adapt or disappear. Among the animals navigating this changing world was a small, vulnerable primate. Not yet human, not quite ape. A creature balanced on the knife's edge between extinction and something extraordinary. Scientists call our earliest known relatives the Australopithecines, the southern apes. They walked upright on 2 legs, which set them apart from nearly every other primate alive. But walking upright was not a gift. It was a gamble. On 2 legs, they were slower than most predators. Their claws were weak. Their jaws were no match for the saber-toothed cats, hyenas, or giant crocodiles that prowled the same landscape. And yet, against every biological expectation, these fragile primates survived. Not just survived, they thrived. And over millions of years of brutal, unrelenting pressure, they transformed into something the ancient world had never seen before. A thinking, platform, cooperating, fire-wielding species that would one day stand at the top of every food chain on the planet. But before any of that could happen, they had to survive the night. And the nights, in Pliocene Africa, were extraordinarily dangerous. Before we go deeper into this story, if you are watching Hominid Echoes for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button below. We cover the deep, untold stories of early humans, prehistoric life, and the origins of civilization, every single week. And drop a comment right now. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. We have viewers from over 90 countries, and every time we read those comments, we are reminded that this story of human survival belongs to all of us, no matter where we are standing today. Now, let's go back 3 million years. The single most important evolutionary decision in human history was made before we had language, before we had tools, before we even had the brains to understand what was happening. Our ancestors chose, or were forced, to walk on 2 legs. This shift, called bipedalism, seems simple, but in evolutionary terms, it was radical. Among all the primates on Earth, only the human lineage committed fully to upright walking. And scientists have debated for decades about why. The most compelling theories point to the changing landscape. As African forests retreated and open grasslands expanded, trees became less central to daily life. Moving across open ground efficiently required a new way of walking. 4-legged movement burns enormous energy over long distances. 2-legged striding is remarkably efficient. Humans can outlast almost any animal on Earth in a long, slow chase. This endurance, marathon-level stamina, would eventually become one of our most powerful hunting tools. But there was a deeper consequence to walking upright that changed everything. When our hands were freed from the ground, they became available for something entirely new. Carrying, gesturing, building, creating. The freed hand is, in many ways, the origin of human civilization. But in those earliest days, it was simply used to carry a child, to carry food, to carry a rock. That rock would matter more than anyone could imagine. But the price of bipedalism was steep. Walking upright meant slower birth canals, more dangerous childbirth, and infants born helpless and dependent for years. No other primate comes into the world as vulnerable as a human baby. That helplessness forced something our ancestors had never needed before: long-term cooperation. Extended family groups, communities built on trust. In other words, bipedalism may have invented human society. To understand what early hominids were up against, you need to understand the world they were living in. The Pliocene and early Pleistocene African environment was a killing ground of extraordinary proportions. It was populated by Dinophilis, a false saber-toothed cat roughly the size of a modern leopard, built for ambush, specifically evolved to prey on primates. Analysis of fossilized skull fragments of Australopithecus found in South Africa, at sites like Swartkrans and Sterkfontein, reveal puncture marks that match Dinophilis fangs precisely. These hominids were hunted, regularly, systematically. But the cats were not alone. Pachycrocuta, the giant short-faced hyena, stood nearly a metre tall at the shoulder. It was not a scavenger. It was an apex hunter, capable of crushing bone. Whole packs of them moved across the savannah, and fossil evidence suggests hominid bones in hyena dens. There were giant baboons, crocodiles larger than any alive today, eagles with talons wide enough to carry juvenile hominids into the sky. The fossil record of a 2-million-year-old child, the Taung child, shows the distinctive damage of a large bird of prey on the back of the skull. A child, taken by an eagle. This was the world our ancestors woke up in every morning, and they had no fangs, no claws, no natural armor. They were smaller than most of their predators, slower than most of their predators, and yet, something was different about them. Something that no predator on the savannah could match or fully predict. But understanding what that something was requires understanding how they lived together. Every species alive today has adapted to survive, but most adapt in the body. Stronger muscles, thicker skin, sharper teeth. Hominids adapted in the mind, and in the space between minds, the group. Early Homo habilis and later Homo erectus developed social structures of extraordinary complexity. Not just packs or herds, but communities with memory, planning, and division of labor. Evidence from archaeological sites like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania reveals that early Homo groups systematically shared food, cooperated in acquiring resources, and returned repeatedly to specific locations, suggesting planning that stretched days into the future. This is not animal behavior. This is proto-human behavior. Social bonds were not just emotionally satisfying, they were survival technology. A single hominid, alone on the savannah at night, was almost certainly dead. But a group of 12, or 20, or 30, each one watching a different direction, was a very different proposition for any predator. And something else was happening inside those groups. Something that would prove more powerful than any claw or fang. Communication. Not language, not yet, but alarm calls, gestures, emotional contagion, the ability to feel what another member of the group was feeling. to synchronize fear and aggression and calm across the group simultaneously. This emotional communication created a collective organism. One hominid spots a lion. The alarm spreads in seconds. The group responds as a unit. A predator that expected to isolate and overwhelm a single individual suddenly faced a coordinated group response. Rocks thrown, sticks raised, voices screaming in unison. Chaos, confusion. The predator retreats, and the hominids learn something critical. Together, they are larger than themselves. That lesson would echo across millions of years. But here is what scientists now believe. The single most transformative discovery in all of human evolution was not a tool, not a migration, not even language. It was something far more elemental, something so ancient, so dangerous, and so terrifying to every other creature on Earth, that when our ancestors finally mastered it, the entire ecological balance of the planet began to shift. What was it? Stay with us. Approximately 2.6 million years ago, somewhere in the region of East Africa, a hominid picked up a rock and deliberately struck it against another rock. The result was a sharp-edged flake. It seems almost impossibly simple, but in that moment, a boundary was crossed. No other animal on Earth was doing this with intention. No other animal was looking at a rock and seeing, inside it, a cutting edge. A future tool. A concept not yet created. These first tools, called Oldowan tools by archaeologists, were crude by any modern standard, but they were revolutionary. Sharp stone flakes could cut through animal hide that bare hands could not penetrate. They could separate meat from bone. They could process plant fibers. They multiplied the range of foods available to hominid groups enormously. And here is what that means. More nutrition. More calories. Bigger brains. The feedback loop between tool use and brain development is one of the most elegant stories in all of evolutionary science. Better tools required more complex thinking to design and execute. More complex thinking required larger, more metabolically expensive brains. Larger brains required more calories. More calories required better tools to access them. Each generation, the loop tightened. By 1.7 million years ago, a new species, Homo erectus, had appeared. Taller, longer-legged, with a brain nearly double the size of its Australopithecine ancestors, and in the hands of Homo erectus, stone tools had evolved from simple flakes to the Acheulean hand axe, a symmetrical, carefully shaped instrument that required planning, memory, and sustained attention to produce. This is the moment that archaeologists sometimes call the first technology. But the most dangerous tool was still to come. Fire. There is a reason this single word carries weight in every language on Earth. A reason that the mythologies of almost every human culture on the planet, from the Greek story of Prometheus to the Aboriginal Dreamtime, place the discovery of fire at the center of the human story. Because it is. The earliest evidence for controlled fire use by hominids comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dated to approximately 1 million years ago. Tiny fragments of burned bone and plant ash, embedded deep within the cave sediments, suggest that Homo erectus was deliberately keeping and feeding fire, not just stumbling across it after a lightning strike. The implications of this are almost impossible to overstate. Fire meant heat in cold nights. It meant the ability to cook food. And cooked food is dramatically easier to digest, releasing far more energy per calorie than raw food. Some scientists, including Harvard's Richard Wrangham, argue that cooking was the primary driver of the final expansion of the human brain. That without fire and cooked food, the metabolic demands of our enormous modern brains could simply never have been met. Fire meant light in the darkness. And for the first time in the history of the primate lineage, the night belonged to us. Every single predator that had hunted hominids was, and remains, deeply afraid of fire. Lions, leopards, hyenas, they flee from it. The very thing that had made the African night deadly and terrifying for millions of years was neutralized. A circle of firelight, 15 feet across, transformed the open savannah into a defensible space. Suddenly, there was time after dark. Time to sit together. Time to talk. Time to tell stories. Researchers believe that it was around the fire, in those long evenings, that human language began to evolve into something more sophisticated. Not just alarm calls and gestures, but narrative. Memory shared across generations. The first oral histories. The first myths. Gather around the fire, and you are doing something your ancestors did every night for 1 million years. That is not a metaphor. That is biology. Armed with fire, armed with tools, bound together in complex social groups that could plan, communicate, and adapt, Homo erectus did something no other hominid had ever done. They left Africa. Beginning approximately 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus populations began moving north and east, crossing into the Levant, into Europe, into the vast landscapes of Asia. Fossils of Homo erectus have been found as far as the island of Java in Indonesia, separated from the African continent by thousands of miles of unfamiliar terrain. This was not a planned migration. There was no map, no destination. It happened slowly, over tens of thousands of generations. People following game, following water, following the perpetual human instinct to see what lies beyond the next horizon. And every environment they entered was different. Different plants, different animals, different climates, different predators. In each new landscape, the tools were adapted, the social structures adjusted, the strategies evolved. This is the moment in human history where our species demonstrated the defining trait that separates us from every other animal on Earth: behavioral flexibility. The ability not just to adapt physically over generations, but to adapt culturally, intellectually, and socially within a single lifetime. When Homo sapiens eventually emerged, approximately 300,000 years ago in Africa, they inherited everything: the bipedalism, the social bonds, the fire, the tools, the migration instinct, the storytelling, and they would take all of it and carry it to every corner of the planet, every mountain range, every desert, every frozen tundra, every Pacific island. No environment on Earth turned them back. The modern world often feels very far from the ancient past. We live in cities that would look like science fiction to every generation of humans before us. We carry devices in our pockets that contain more knowledge than any library in history. We move through a world of abundance, food available at any hour, warmth available at the turn of a dial, safety maintained by complex systems of law and infrastructure. It is easy in this world to forget. But here is what the fossil record whispers to us, across 3 million years of stone and bone. You are here because they survived. You are here because a small, frightened primate on the open African savannah refused to be eaten. Because they stood together when standing alone meant death. Because one of them, one night, looked at a rock and imagined a cutting edge inside it. Because another reached into the embers of a grass fire and carried a burning branch back to the group. Because parents carried helpless children for years, and groups protected those parents, and communities remembered what individuals forgot. Every instinct you have ever felt, the pull toward warmth, toward community, toward the safety of familiar faces, is 3 million years old. Every time you sit around a table with people you love, some ancient circuit in your brain registers: safe, enough, together. That is not culture. That is evolution. The lions are gone from most of the world now. The hyenas no longer wait at the edge of the firelight. The ancient predators that shaped our ancestors into something extraordinary have mostly disappeared. But the humans they forged are still here, carrying everything that was learned in the darkness into every tomorrow. If this journey through the ancient past moves something in you, if these stories of survival, intelligence, and the quiet resilience of our earliest ancestors stayed with you, then you are exactly who this channel exists for. Subscribe to Hominid Echoes. Every week, we go deeper into the stories that made us human. Early migrations, the rise of language, the first sacred sites, the Neanderthals, the mysteries of Denisovans, the ice ages that almost ended everything. There is so much more to tell, and we want to tell it with you here. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, share this video with someone who still wonders where we came from. Because wonder is how it all begins.